Like most people who grew up in the 2000s, I played a lot of Call of Duty as a kid. I first got Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare on my Xbox back in 2008, and it soon became a tradition every year for my dad to get me the newest Call of Duty game at Christmas. I loved the multiplayer, the bonus stuff was always pretty cool, but honestly one of my favourite parts was always the campaign. But as I got older, I stopped playing the games as much, and by the time Call of Duty Ghosts came around, I had stopped keeping up with the franchise. Like most people, I thought it lost its charm and was becoming quite repetitive. I'd really gotten into Minecraft, and I didn't think too much about Call of Duty. That was until Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019 released. I'd heard good things about this game from my friend Tom.
Hello, I just watched Jimmy Fallon clips on YouTube all day.
And the campaign really caught my eye. It looked like it was getting back in touch with what made it originally so great. I got on my PS4, and while I think the campaign was quite a bit weaker than its predecessors, it did well enough that I started to think about the franchise a bit more. It also helped that I was playing an absurd amount of Warzone.
No, just no! You fucker!
It was at this time last year that I decided I was going to start a project. I was going to play every Call of Duty campaign, analysing what worked and what didn't, and ranking them as I went along. I envisioned splitting the series into 4 parts, featuring 4 games per video, aiming to have them all released by the time the 19th mainline game in the franchise, Call of Duty Cold War, came out.
You're the expert in quiet.
I'm a goddamn onion.
I was going to play each campaign on Hardened, as regular seemed way too easy, but veteran difficulty honestly seemed like a form of self-abuse. I also avoided the multiplayer and other game modes, just because I wanted to focus on the core single player experience and how that evolved over the years. Now, in that time, I've only managed to beat Call of Duty 1 and 2. I may have underestimated the time, patience and determination needed to get this project done. Even still, I made pretty good progress on the first part of the video, which is about the first game. So here it is. I might get round to the other games in the franchise someday, but I'm not making any promises. So as you might expect, we're starting with Call of Duty 2003, the first game in the franchise. Now, going into this, I was expecting your standard World War II shooter. I didn't have too many expectations past that. After all, whenever anyone talks about the start of the franchise, they all talk about how great Call of Duty 2 was, and Call of Duty 2003 isn't really mentioned. All I knew was that the newly formed Infinity Ward was made up of members who had left the Medal of Honor team, and people often called this game a bit of a Medal of Honor clone. Now, I did once rent a Medal of Honor game on the PS2 back in the day from Blockbusters, and I'm pretty sure I did enjoy it. All I was really expecting was an average American campaign, probably starting by you storming Omaha Beach. Playing the tutorial mission, I was quite surprised by 2 things. First of all, most of the controls were the same as other Call of Duty games, except I couldn't sprint and I didn't have regenerative health. While this might seem a small difference, this completely changes the way you have to play, but we'll come back to that later. The first mission doesn't throw you onto Omaha Beach, but instead sees you parachuting behind enemy lines and meeting up with your allies. Now I have got to admit, this did lead to a slightly anticlimactic first kill for the game. Truly riveting stuff. The first 2 missions are short, but they were really fun and got me excited for the rest of the game. The controls were a little janky and it did take me a little while to get used to them. I kept trying to sprint, but instead I was swinging my gun around, which actually led to me killing a teammate.
Oh.
But once I did get the hang of it, I really started to have fun and found myself getting quite immersed in the experience. I'll break down what I liked in just a bit, but my expectations for the rest of the game were pretty high. Sadly, the game's cracks start to show the more you play. But before we get to that, I'd like to discuss the story a bit. Basically, there isn't really a story. As someone who's only really played the modern games in the franchise, I'm used to narratives that tie together all the missions, valuing the plot over historical accuracy. That really isn't the case here. In this game, you play as 3 different silent protagonists who all represent different factions in the war. Private Martin for the Americans, Sergeant Evans for the English, and Private Alexei for the Russians. These 3 different campaigns aren't concerned with telling a story, but rather depicting how the war was actually fought, with many of the levels being inspired by true events. For example, the Pegasus Bridge level in the English campaign takes inspiration from the real-life Operation Tonga, an operation that saw British soldiers capturing key strategic bridges. As a result, many people say this game does a great job of making you feel like your average soldier. That's true most of the time, but I was surprised by how many action-like set pieces there are in the game. By the 4th mission, you're in a Fast and Furious style car chase, which sees you drifting around the French countryside and shooting at Nazis. You'll also be sneaking onto a Nazi ship, sniping in the snow, fighting through the sewers of Moscow, shooting down dive bombers and even storming the Reichstag. There's a great variation of levels here. While you're not alone, your squad mates are hardly 3-dimensional characters. Characters such as Private Elder and Sergeant Moody are just there to bark orders and provide the odd bit of light-hearted comic relief. Captain Price does appear in this game, but I'm going to have to assume this is the grandfather of the Price we know from the modern games due to the time difference. He's also a little bit stranger than the Price I remember. While I do appreciate this approach to the campaigns, it sometimes can feel a little bit disjointed, and the final stretch of the game does feel a bit underwhelming. Storming the Reichstag, for example, is quite disappointing. The narration from Alexei at the end is nice, but I don't really feel attached to anyone. I enjoyed it, but I think I prefer the more narrative-focused campaigns that we see later in the series. But let's talk about the gameplay. As mentioned, the first couple of missions got me really excited. The difference in mechanics meant that I wasn't running and gunning like I usually would in the other games, but instead I was taking my time, taking precise shots, and flanking enemies whenever I could. Whenever you are able to flank or flash at enemies, it always feels incredibly rewarding. Also, the game's presentation is fantastic for the time. I can't say what it was like when it first came out, because I was only 5 years old. Obviously by today's standards it does look a little rough, but it evokes a nice bit of nostalgia for me. Despite the limitations, Infinity Ward created some brilliant settings. The dam level in particular is one of my favourites, featuring a huge backdrop that helps really sell the scale of the dam. The soundtrack is fantastic throughout, as you can hear, and the sound design really holds up in the heat of battle. The guns themselves are a bit hit or miss. The rifles are easily the best and really pack a punch, no pun intended for all the zombie fans, but the machine guns are a little bit too unreliable. This was one of the first games to introduce looking down the sights, and it's often praised for it, but I can't even see what I'm doing if I aim down the sights with an SMG. Grenades are great for flushing enemies out, but I rarely found myself having to use my pistol. It was a bit of a useless addition to my equipment. I honestly think the only pistol kill I got was the one I showed you earlier. Saying that, in some levels you do not have enough ammo to get you all the way through. This is especially true in the Russian levels, forcing you to scavenge whatever you can find to continue the fight. It rewards planning ahead while also selling the idea that the Russians are incredibly outgunned, which I really like. There are also a couple tank levels, which I usually despise, but these were fun, short, and they didn't overstay their welcome, which cannot be said for most of the tank levels in the other Call of Duty games. Despite all this praise, I have to say I did get frustrated with the core gameplay for a large part of this game. When you start, you're often out in the open, which gives you lots of options. However, soon enough you'll be forced into smaller environments, which is where the game design falls apart and it becomes incredibly punishing and unfair. Enemies can pop out from any corner and kill you before you can even react, and they'll zone onto you the moment you break cover, giving you no opportunity to strike first without taking damage. This is a huge issue with the health bar, because if you don't have the luck of being near any health kits, you're now at a huge disadvantage and probably 1 or 2 shots away from being dead, and then you've got to do it all over again. Allies are all but useless and often just get in your way when you're trying to do something, leading to you shooting them instead of the enemy. No ally was actually useful in this game, except for Sergeant Waters, who fell from the sky like an angel and killed this enemy for me. Because your allies are useless and normally die before the level is done, it's too easy to become overwhelmed by enemies. This hurts the defense segments of the game the most, which start out great. You'll be rushing from point A to B repelling enemies, but soon enough you'll become so overwhelmed you can't even progress. During the Pavlov's house mission, for example, you have to defend the building from enemies and tanks in the distance. This building has several floors you have to navigate to do so, which allows for enemies to attack from all directions and hide in little rooms, and you'll even be attacked by enemies you can't see outside. I got so overwhelmed I couldn't even repel the tanks without being flanked. I had to autosave spam and then hide until reinforcements arrived, which did nothing but ruin the moment and break my immersion. This cowardly way of playing is the only way to win, and I'm pretty sure this would have got me killed by Stalin himself for cowardice. Too often, it just feels like the gameplay goes against what the developers want you to actually experience. During the Stalingrad mission, I was so immersed at first. The Commissar was barking orders and threats, the destroyed city loomed in the distance, and all my comrades looked terrified. Well, except for this guy and his twin, who just looked a bit nervous. But once I took control, I just kept getting killed before I could make any progress, completely ruining the immersion. You might point the finger at me and tell me to turn the difficulty down, but to me that isn't an excuse. 90% of the deaths were due to no fault of my own, but instead it was all unavoidable. Trust me guys, I'm a professional. I'm really good at video games, I've got a great track record, and I never make mistakes.
Are you taking the piss?
In all seriousness, this is a shame, because the game is often so close to nailing that feeling of being one man among a thousand, just fighting to survive. But what are the themes of the game, and what's it trying to say? Most modern Call of Duty games have a political stance, even if they claim they don't.
Question, is this a political game, doesn't actually mean anything, because it's what does the word political mean to you?
Now, this clearly started with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, which, as the name suggests, had something to say about modern warfare. This game doesn't have much to say about the war, other than it was hell for those who fought in it, choosing to focus on key events and battles to represent this. This is fine. As I've mentioned already, the game's sole focus does seem to be presenting the different factions of the war and how they fought the Germans, and I think it achieves this quite well. While the core gameplay is the same throughout, there is a clear difference between the American, English and Russian campaigns. The American campaign, for example, is the easiest because its theme is one of unity and teamwork, whereas the Russian campaign in contrast is one of desperation and ruthlessness, which is reflected in its setting, level design and difficulty. While the game does make you think about the position your characters are in, it doesn't really ask you to think about your actions. You just do whatever you have to do. This is a little bit different in later games like Call of Duty World at War or Modern Warfare 2019, but being a game from 2003, I don't mind this. I'm hardly expecting an early 2000s World War II shooter to make me question my actions, and as far as I can recall, there aren't any civilians in the game anyway. All in all, I did enjoy my time with this game, even if I have a lot to complain about. Call of Duty isn't even close to perfect, but it has its moments and it's interesting to look back on. I'd give it 3 out of 5 Medals of Honor. Since it's the first of the bunch, it automatically gets ranked at number 1 so far. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I might one day get round to doing some of the other games and adding them to the podium, but we'll have to wait and see about that. I might have some more videos coming soon. Then again, who knows, this one did take me about a year to make. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
What's going on? I bet you I've got to get on that gun. Yep. Park it in reverse, Captain. Nice. Ooh. What's he doing? Where's Price? Where's Price? Oh. Oh, what? He's dead?
Oh no!
What?
Seriously, he was in the second game or something.
He is in the second game.